this was my experience from being at university for just 3 weeks. Gender theory, critical race theory, LGBTQIA madness, white privilege, death threats, trans issues, complete social isolation, physical attacks, relentless mental abuse, no support from staff or lecturers, and a completely corrupt university system. So it's my first day at university. Already I have reservations about the education system based on the madness that we saw in 2020, 2021, 2022 and so forth regarding lockdown, COVID, and how irresponsible the education system was towards young people. But I went in with an element of hope. I thought potentially the education system at a higher level would be there to support young adults, there to promote freedom of speech, would be there to give young people the stepping stone and ability to forge a future which was actually responsible and beneficial to our mental well-being, physical well-being, and political identity and expression, which doesn't include ordinary, white, heterosexual men such as myself. In fact, we are excluded from the majority of universities. So I walk in on day one, and what is the first thing I am asked to do? What's your name? Montgomery Toms. Would you like a pronoun badge? No, I don't want a pronoun badge. I don't believe in gender theory or anything related to pronouns. Oh really? The student assistant was there delivering pronoun badges. Like the virtuous, honest, kind, open-hearted individual that is being hosted at what I thought was an honest, optimistic and quote-unquote progressive institution. They then asked me, well, we do have he, him pronouns. Well, isn't that funny? So you can assume my gender, huh? Well, instantly I rejected that as well. And that was within the first 10 minutes of arriving at my university. Fast forward, we of course have introductory lessons. The opportunity to meet the lecturers and meet the students and just engage in university culture on the first few days. Of course, most students, they are nervous, and they want to meet people and they want to be part of a group which they're going to be working with for the next 3 or 4 years. My lecturer then stands up, hands out a piece of paper and says that these are the rules of the university campus. Now I thought, surely these are going to be rational rules, but I was prepared for something far more sinister, something far more concerning and worrying. These were the rules that were laid out for young minds that they are to follow and submit to within the modern university education system. Pronouns. Respect the use of pronouns and avoid making assumptions. Ask people how they want to be addressed. At this point, after going through the pronoun madness on the door from this strange student telling me that I can identify as whatever I want, I was really starting to get a little bit sensitive to some incredibly important topics which I entirely reject. I don't just disagree, I fundamentally reject any push to identify as whatever you want, and I think that it comes with a far more sinister agenda. So I was already prepared to have yet another fight on my hands when combating the education system. But it gets worse. Check your privilege. Think about how you are occupying this space and the visible and invisible hierarchies that exist. Be aware how your privilege perpetuates oppression and discrimination. At this point, I'm in shock. I've just come out of secondary school education and now I'm having to deal with an adult talking to another adult about how being white somehow can offend or upset or affect somebody who is black or mixed race. Is this seriously where we're at now? Do we seriously have to be sensitive to our own skin colour so not to offend other students? It is the most divisive, sickening, and quite frankly, puritanical, strange adaptation of what the education system is strictly designed to do, which is allow freedom of expression and the ability to grow as a team with unity amongst students and evolve as a young person. But instead, it is fueled with division, labelling, and some weird, woke, virtue signalling obsession, which even the lecturers are paid to promote. Another point, mind your language. Be kind, polite, and respectful to others. We will challenge you if we see you use abusive, racist, sexist, misogynistic, ableist, classist, sizist, ageist, homophobic or transphobic language. Is there anything else we can't say? Is there anything else we can't risk? Ultimately, in order to grow, you have to risk offending people. You have to risk making some kind of judgment or pushing the boundaries. But instead, as young adults, we are suffocated relentlessly, told what to do, what to say, how to act. It is utterly exhausting, and no wonder we are now in a position where young people are feeble and useless and unable to express themselves. So it's been a few days, and I've started to be a bit more active on my social media. I started by ripping off a gay pride flag that had been stuck over a J.K. Rowling poster. This went viral across my student accommodation and also across my university. These students, they weren't a fan of the fact that I was defacing a gay pride flag. Of course, I'm homophobic, I'm far right, I'm a Nazi. Obviously, for those with a bit more of a brain, you can understand my point here. J.K. Rowling has made some incredibly profound and important points about the gender theory tsunami. So I, of course, in protest, ripped off this gay pride flag. But this was the start of something even more concerning. Instantly, the reaction I got was death threats, relentless abuse, private messages of people telling me they were going to come for me. Worse than that, I'd walk into the university and students would move away from me as if I was some kind of plague. I felt like I was the only unmasked person walking into a hospital during COVID times. I became this nightmare, all because I ripped a gay pride flag off a J.K. Rowling poster. So when I got these death threats, and when I got these people attacking me and refusing to engage with me, of course they engaged with me over the internet, but when they saw me in person, they did struggle to even say a thing until later on. I went to King's Cross and performed a speech.
I'm a university student who is now having to fight back because I'm being demonised because I do not support the mutilation of children in regards to transitioning gender to gender. I'm at a university which supports the transgender agenda quite a bit. I don't. In fact, I stand against it. And that's not because I'm against trans people, nor am I against gay people, nor am I against lesbian people, bisexual people, but simply I just don't think that children should be taught this as young as 4 years old throughout the education system. Pay attention to the education system. Pay attention to what kids are being taught in school. Parents need to start to look at what their children are being taught. To the university students who want to slander my name, who want to call me a fascist, who want to mock me, who want to demonise me, I will always fight for the truth. I will always fight for the children. You will never break me. Thank you.
Essentially, marking my territory, I will not comply or submit to this weird, nefarious indoctrination technique that has infested and drip-fed its way into the education system. What was actually quite hilarious, which had zero effect on me, but was totally pathetic and shallow, was the little memes that circulated of me holding a gay pride flag and all this nonsense. To be honest, that actually introduced an element of fun and playfulness to the whole situation, because as miserable as I was dealing with all of this nonsense, I was also having a bit of fun. Because ultimately, what I was dealing with was so infantile, so immature, it was like waking up and having a game to play. It meant that when I woke up in the morning, my life was quite exciting, and I was just waiting for what the mob and the virtue signalling weirdos had decided to come up with on this fresh, fine morning. And here's an example.
Fuck off out of this place.
I thought, if you're gonna go for me, I'm gonna fight right back and show that I am not afraid of the mob. Bearing in mind that I was currently at university with members of Antifa and people who directly practiced very strange satanic rituals and were into an entire franchise of rejecting traditional British approaches to life. May it be Christianity, rejecting same-sex marriage, being involved with the church, or anything wholesome that holds British culture together. These people completely rejected that. But as it happens, as much as I completely despise these kind of approaches to life and don't want any involvement with them, people should have the right to go about what the hell they want to do, just as long as it doesn't affect other people directly or hurt people, etc. However, these people, they don't necessarily operate like that. So let's pull away from what it was like inside the university and move in the direction of what it was like in my university accommodation. I had people waiting outside my door, sat there, knowing I was going to walk out, ready to pick a fight, insult me, say something that they thought was going to affect me and get under my skin, because they were so frustrated with the fact that I had no interest in complying or submitting to their ridiculous cultish ideology. So every morning I woke up, I had a shower, I put a three-piece suit on, and I faced them to the best of my ability. Now, from what they could tell, I didn't care, and that frustrated them more, and of course that was part of my technique, but ultimately, I was not finding it easy. As kind of strong-minded as I am, I was waking up and having to deal with the fact that I had people relentlessly trying to attack me, undermine me. I had to walk into my kitchen only to be called a Nazi, conspiracy theorist, and of course we got on the topics of how I questioned the lockdown narrative, didn't wear a mask, rejected the experimental drug they tried to push on young people specifically, and all of the above that I directly stand against. I kept my head down, I tried not to pick fights, and I tried not to be too provocative, whilst also keeping a good balance with making a point that I will not be beaten, and there are other people like me out there in the UK who don't necessarily have the willpower or strength or resilience or even want to put themselves in the position that I put myself in. But I'm making this video because I want to tell young people that this was an awful experience for me. But that's only because I acted in such a strong way. But that should not be the case. Young people have a direct responsibility to defend what they believe in. We have a systemic issue where young people don't have an opinion, they're not willing to debate, they're not willing to push ideas, push the boundaries, risk offending people, challenge the education system as we know it. That is going to lead us, in fact is leading us, down a terrifying, dystopian, nefarious route and push us in a direction that they think is right. But I don't necessarily think it is right, and I know many other young people, if they were informed of what's going on in the world on a regular basis, without the mainstream media pushing a specific narrative, I'm not sure young people do want what's coming later on down the line. So wake up and do something about it. It's interesting because the kind of people that apply that level of pressure and the kind of people that want to attack me so much, may they be members of Antifa, been indoctrinated by the education system from a young age, had terrible parental influences or listen to the mainstream media every day, they tend to be cowards. They tend to be people who haven't had a strong education and are very weak-minded and willing to try and pick on people like myself, but as a flock of sheep, not willing to be the one person who stands up and says no amongst millions.
I will not be part of an agenda which influences young minds to take medication in order to try and change their estrogen or testosterone levels. I will not be part of an agenda that suggests that young people should have certain parts of their body amputated. I will not be a part of this, and I will fundamentally fight against the mutilation of children, and I will fundamentally fight for free speech, and I will fundamentally fight against children being indoctrinated by these ideas at such a tender age. This is victim mentality. It is the idea that if you do not comply and submit to the woke brigade's virtue signaling agenda, then you are then deemed as wrong, a bad person, and should be demonized. If you ask me to refer to you by something you're not, you've got another thing coming, because I will not have my speech altered because of your delusion. This has gone too far now. Too many people in my generation have been indoctrinated by this. That is because there is just a tsunami of systematic brainwashing throughout the education system, which is so hard to resist. I really am at my wit's end with my generation and how consumed we have become, committing to ideas which once upon a time were just so ludicrous and for a reason. Now, first of all, you've got to look at free speech. That, for me, is fundamental in the fact that I am in an institution, for example, such as university, where for me to challenge these ideas and for me to have a juxtaposing point of view, I would then be demonized and treated as somebody who is a far-right extremist. Now, the second thing is how it is pushed through our education system, how it's pushed down our throats, and especially from such young ages at the lower end of primary schools. And personally, I don't think that young minds should be being taught or educated on anything regarding sexuality, sex, gender theory, or anything like that. I think children should be left to be children, and I think that naturally you evolve through life and start to understand the different variations and complexities. We have to look at the physical and mental effect that this is having on young generations. And we have to look at the fact that these people are literally having their breasts cut off, their penis removed, in the name of being transgender. I know that my generation, fundamentally, the majority of them, can sympathise with what I'm saying. And I know that they all have the ability to stand up and say, no, I do not want to be involved with this agenda. So I'm asking, please have a voice. I cannot do it on my own. We need to come together in complete unity and stand up against universities, stand up against the education system and say no.
And of course, this is a trend of education, but it's moved in a far more scary direction, to the point where I got forced out of university. So I went back into university and I went to make a decision. I realised I need to get out. I am not going to last in this institution for 3 years. I made multiple videos at the time saying that I don't believe a man can identify as a woman and vice versa. I made my point incredibly clear. I went out on a megaphone. I performed all sorts of very audacious stunts to basically say, you are not going to beat me. And I am part of a network of individuals who 100% agree with me. I'm not a fascist. I believe in freedom, but I don't believe you should have the ability to tell me what to do and especially what to say. This is the culture that now inhabits universities in the UK, and it's a culture that we must fight back against and resist wholeheartedly, because it's a terrifying and deeply upsetting attack on young minds where cognitive dissonance has suddenly become pure normality. One time I walked out of my room into the corridor and there was a group of people there, not necessarily waiting for me at this point, but they didn't like me very much. One bit that was particularly hilarious was when the boyfriend of essentially my next door neighbour shouted out, "wanker," just as I was walking to actually go and watch Jordan Peterson talk at the O2. Instantly I turned around and said, "What do you say?" He didn't realise I'd heard him, and he actually hid behind his girlfriend, who was actually quite nice. She wasn't that disrespectful towards me in any sense, really. She was willing to have an open discussion and open debate. But regardless, he hid behind her in her room and refused to have any form of a conversation with me. So you're dealing with incredibly narcissistic, self-interested cowards, which in one sense is quite easy to deal with. But when they come in packs of hundreds, if not thousands, surrounding you at a time, it certainly is a pretty exhausting, miserable experience, especially when you're just trying to get a bloody education at university. Another brilliant example was when I was speaking to a group of people who were in my kitchen and they were telling me about how I'm a racist. Because essentially I don't believe in critical race theory and don't subscribe to this woke idea that there should be a divide between white and black. I believe that we should be colourblind and that we should treat people based on merit of character, etc. But that would be an audacious, arrogant thing to say, wouldn't it? Outrageous, because that is such a racist thing that I've just put forward. Now I have a very good friend, he's called Ramis. He's black and he's Jamaican and stood against the Black Lives Matter movement. To that, they didn't really know what to say. But later on in the week, I actually invited Ramis to come over and we sat in the kitchen and these university students walked in and didn't know what to say. In fact, they just whispered and giggled in the corner. Meanwhile, I knew that they actually accused Ramis of being a racist himself, even though they were white and he is black. And he's a racist. In fact, he regularly got this title of being a traitor to his own race. This is how ludicrous these individuals are. Once again, another example of all words and pure cowardice and an immature lack of ability with any logic and most importantly, anything of an individual nature. These people follow each other like sheep in terms of their ideologies and whatever's spewed out in the mainstream and through the education system. The type of students that are in my university accommodation tend to be vegan and fit the stereotype of the typical very left-wing Marxist kind of group. Incredibly feminine men, a lack of interest in testosterone, training at the gym, eating meat, massive climate change advocates, a lover of green energy and electric cars, and complete haters when it comes to oil. You know the kind of person that I am referring to. They inhabited the place that I lived at, and I had to live and walk among these people whilst completely exposing my opinions, which made living in student accommodation, well, let's just say not very fun. So it came to week 3, and I went in and I spoke to my lecturers, and I said, look, I just don't think this is going to work out. I don't think I can spend the next 3 years within this university. And I also don't think that I want to be spending 60 grand paying for my own suffering and demise. What was very interesting is my lecturers had very little pushback when it came to me wanting to leave the university. You see, it tends to be that university lecturers and the university itself, they don't want you to leave their institution, but there was very little resistance when it came to me. It was like a conversation they didn't want to have, but they were very glad I was initiating it, and they were very glad that I was leaving. Fortunately, I got my money back, I left university, and I stayed in my student accommodation for just a few more long, arduous weeks, and I was blessed by some very, very good people in my life who allowed me to sleep on their sofa as I worked 70 hours a week and pulled myself out of debt and moved on with my life. And an element of repaired strength that was born out of resilience and, let's face it, very unnecessary internal suffering from being isolated and cut away from the one thing that should be completely normal, which is going to university. Now, I'm not saying pity me, because I made these decisions and I also dealt with the situation in the best way I possibly could. I don't want any pity, I don't want any sympathy, because I'm very happy that I left that institution and worked incredibly hard to get to where I am now. But my message is not just to young people, but it's to the lecturers as well, and those who are within the education system and have direct impact into how universities, secondary schools and primary schools are run. Get your priorities in order. Young people are the future of not just this country, but the West. Now, I know there are some people with some very, very concerning agendas, but I don't think that that is the lecturers and teachers. However, you are the ones that are enforcing everything that I have just detailed in this video. You are responsible for the indoctrination and attack on young minds, and you will carry that for the rest of your life. I'm the one that got away, and I know a few other young people who have taken the same path. But the majority of young minds and the youth of today are being attacked, indoctrinated, and systematically abused within the education system. And as teachers and lecturers, you have a responsibility to protect the welfare of young minds. And if you enforce these divisive, authoritarian, dystopian, unscientific, miserable ideologies and cult-like manifesto on the generation which is going to be governing and leading our country and the West, you are going to severely regret your actions. And it even chokes me up at times to think about what I've had to go through just to get to where I am now, considering how simple and easy it should be for young minds these days. Instead, it's do as you're told or have an incredibly hard time. Once again, I want to make it very clear, I do not need pity. I do not need any sympathy. I made all of these decisions, but I shouldn't have had to make these decisions. And I'm so grateful for the love and help I have had along the way. But other young people need to come out with that herd mentality that drives this alternative agenda and push it in the direction of reality and truth. Because the only way we are going to free our minds and rid ourselves of state indoctrination is if we come together in pure unity and say no. Now, if I have a message to the people who attempted to bring me down, well, you very much failed, because now I am self-employed, I am doing quite well after a year of incredibly hard work, I have my own flat, I have no part of the education system, and I'm fighting on behalf of you. Because as much as I hate what has been done to my generation and the effect that it's had on young people like myself, I still want to make things better. I still want my generation to be forgiven and loved, because ultimately it's not your fault. I'm very fortunate. I had two absolutely amazing parents that influenced me outside of the education system. But for those young people who don't get that level of exterior education, well, ultimately, it's not your fault. The education system has been designed in a way to force you to believe one set of ideas that are put forward by people hidden in the shadows. Fortunately, there are hundreds, if not thousands of people working to benefit young people. And I truly believe that we are going to win this fight for truth, reality, and freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and the ability to lead on basic common sense. I used to be very angry at my generation. I used to be very frustrated and abusive about what we are and what we stand for. It's not an optimistic approach, and I do believe that in time we can unravel the harm and distress and manipulation that has happened to young people. My name is Montgomery Toms. Thank you for watching this video. It's important to note that I was forced out of university in 2023, and now I sit here in 2025 only just making this video, and it's been a long time coming. I appreciate it if you would support me in any way you can, and thank you for watching to the end of this very short documentary. I will see you in the next video.